He didn't say it with malice. That's the part that stunned me. There was no raised voice, no guilt quivering at the edge of his sentence, just the quiet finality of paperwork, already signed a ride already scheduled, and a suitcase I didn't pack. "It's just a nursing home, Mom," he said, eyes flicking toward his phone. "It'll be easier for everyone." And that was it. That was my dismissal, smoothed over with polite words and practiced ease, as if I were a liability being resolved. The car arrived within the hour. He didn't help me into it. He didn't look back. I sat in the back seat with my hands folded neatly over my purse like a schoolgirl, being driven to a new institution. Except I wasn't a child, and this wasn't school. This was exile with a plastic mattress and a room that smelled of mildew and forgotten birthdays. There were no flowers on the nightstand, no family photos on the wall. I wasn't even allowed to bring my tea set, the porcelain one he bought me after graduating college. It was too fragile, the facility director said. I almost laughed at that. So was I. The room was cold. The lights were too bright. There was a woman in the hallway who kept repeating the same word over and over again like a scratched record. I wanted to go home, but home, apparently, was now a line item on my son's financial plan. That first night, I didn't sleep. I laid there, staring at the ceiling, replaying everything the way he spoke, the absence of tenderness, how he never asked me if I was okay with it, because he already knew I wouldn't be, and he didn't care. It would be a mistake to think this started that day. It didn't. That day was just the final punctuation. The sentence had been writing itself for years. I remember when he was a little boy with a mop of wild hair and cheeks that flushed when he was excited. He used to run to me after school with both arms outstretched. "Mom, guess what?" Every single day. Back then, I was his safe place, his favorite voice, his whole world. When did that change? I wish I could pinpoint the moment, the exact second I became optional. But it's never that simple. Love doesn't rot overnight. It decays slowly over time, in silence behind closed doors and unsent texts. At breakfast, the next morning, they served lukewarm oatmeal and apples that tasted like cardboard. I looked around at the other residents, all of us dressed in neutral tones, our chairs facing small televisions, with the volume turned up too loud. A nurse helped a man next to me with his spoon. He drooled a little, and she wiped his chin without looking at him. I turned my face toward the window. It looked out onto a brick wall. No trees, no lake, no morning light on water. For years, that lake was how I started my day. I'd wake before the sun, make a cup of jasmine tea, and sit on the back porch, wrapped in my shawl, while the world turned orange. It was the only time I let myself be still. Everything else, the laundry, the groceries, the appointments, the endless tending, came after. I built that home. Not just with money, but with attention, with care, with choices. And in one unspoken afternoon, it was taken. Not sold, not lost, taken. By someone who believed convenience was more important than dignity. My son never called that first week. Neither did his wife. Not even a message. Not even a "how's it going?" They must have thought I'd settle in like a piece of misplaced furniture, finally tucked into a storage unit. But I didn't settle. I counted ceiling tiles at night. I walked the halls like a ghost during the day. I smiled politely to the nurses and cried only in the shower. And slowly, something else began to grow in that silence. Not rage, not sorrow. Clarity. Clarity came not as a roar, but as a whisper, the kind that slips in quietly, when no one's paying attention. It arrived on the 5th night, around 2 a.m, while the hallway light blinked through the cracked door, and someone 2 rooms over cried out for a husband who died 20 years ago. I sat up in bed, heart hollowed out, but strangely steady, and I thought, they don't get to decide the ending of my story. Not my son, not his wife, not the administrators with clipboards and cold hands, not even time. I wasn't dead. I wasn't gone. I was placed. That was different. I had been filed away, not buried. And if I still had breath, I still had a choice. The next morning, I asked to use the phone. The receptionist blinked, like I'd spoken a foreign language. Residents didn't usually make outside calls unless it was for birthdays or funerals. But I smiled sweetly and said it was urgent. My hand didn't even shake when I dialed the number. "Hello," a warm voice answered. "Luis," I said, "it's me." There was a pause, then a soft gasp. "Mrs. Halpern, ma'am. Are you okay?" I looked out at the brick wall again. "Do you still take care of the lake house?" "Yes, ma'am. Every week. Lawn, windows, gutters. No one's lived there since. I want you to do something for me," I said, my voice calm. "I want you to find a lawyer." There was silence on the other end, then very gently, "Yes, ma'am. Luis was our gardener for 17 years. He had keys to the house long before my son did. He was the only one who ever noticed the peonies I planted near the back fence, the only one who brought tools before I asked. He never called me the old woman. He called me the Senora, with respect, with kindness. And when I handed him birthday cards each June, with a crisp bill tucked inside, he'd touch his chest and say, 'Too much. Always too much.' I never told him how much that meant to me, but I remembered it now. The facility had rules, of course. No private legal arrangements, no outside representatives without family consent. But here's the thing about rules. They're made for the comfort of those in control. They assume the people underneath them have already given up. I hadn't. Luis and I spoke every day for a week, quietly, carefully, always from the nurse's desk, or during the brief window of recreation hour when I could slip away. He found a lawyer through a friend, a kind one, he said, one who listened more than she talked. And when she called me the first time, I felt more heard in 5 minutes than I had in 5 months. Turns out the lake house had never been officially transferred. The deed was still in my name. My son assumed power of attorney, but he never actually filed the paperwork. Sloppy, lazy, entitled. He thought I wouldn't notice. I noticed. It took 3 weeks. 3 weeks of slow faxes, whispered updates, notarized documents slipped into envelopes, and signatures done under supervision. The facility nurse thought I was drawing. I told her it was a letter to my niece. She nodded and went back to her crossword puzzle. And then one morning, it was done. Luis arrived in a clean white shirt and black slacks. He smelled faintly of lemongrass and earth. He handed me a small folded receipt and a set of keys I knew by touch alone. "It's yours," he said. "Every room, every window, every stone." "No," I corrected him. "It's ours." I had made him the legal heir to the house, not because I was trying to make a statement, though it would become one, not out of revenge, but because he had cared for it more than anyone else, because when I was pushed aside, he leaned in, and that I had come to realize was what home really meant. Not blood, not papers, not titles, care. That same afternoon, I asked the facility if I could leave. "Just for a walk," I said. They hesitated. I smiled. They agreed. Luis waited at the edge of the sidewalk with the engine running. When I got in, I didn't look back. The lake was still there. The porch still creaked. The jasmine tea still lived in the second cabinet, right where I left it. I sat on that porch for hours breathing. I didn't call my son, not yet. I wanted him to find out the way I'd found out, with no warning, no invitation, and no kindness, just the cold, hard truth of a locked gate and a name removed from the mailbox. He would learn it wasn't just a nursing home, and I wasn't just his mother. The silence that followed was not the kind that hurts. It was the kind that healed, slowly, like warm honey poured over old scars. At the lake house time behaved differently. The air was heavier with memory, and the quiet felt less like absence and more like space. I walked through each room deliberately. My footsteps echoed slightly on the wood floor, and I didn't try to quiet them. I let them sing. I touched the books, still stacked on the windowsill, the cracked ceramic dish I once used for cookies, the dusty frame that still held a photo of me and my late husband on our anniversary, back when we still smiled with our eyes. I wasn't trying to pretend I was young again. I wasn't looking for ghosts. I was trying to remember who I had been before I became someone's burden. That night, I slept in my own bed, not a hospital cot, not a laminated mattress with rails. My bed. The sheets were stiff from disuse, but smelled faintly of lavender. I wept into the pillow, quietly, not from grief, but from the unfamiliar relief of choosing where I would rest. No one came to wake me at 6 a.m. No one reminded me to take my pills. And yet somehow I still woke up alive. The lawyer came by the next day, a woman in her 30s, with eyes like polished river stones, and a voice that sounded like it had read too much poetry. She brought copies of the deed documents certifying Luis's inheritance, and a stack of envelopes addressed to every authority that needed informing. I included a copy for your son, she said gently, in case you want to send it. I stared at the envelope. It had his name on it, the name I once whispered with pride, the name I taught him to write with stubby fingers and oversized crayons. I'm not ready, I said. She nodded. She didn't push. The next few weeks passed in a rhythm I hadn't realized I missed. Luis came every 3 days to tend the grounds. He didn't hover or ask questions. He'd just greet me with a warm, respectful smile, and sometimes hand me a pastry his wife had baked, always in wax paper, always with a napkin folded like a flower. I read books from my own shelf. I listened to birds instead of hallway buzzers. I made soup slowly, letting the onions brown just the way I liked them. I looked out over the lake and whispered things I hadn't dared say aloud in years, and I thought, this is not revenge. This is repair. Still, the world has a way of catching up. One morning, a car I didn't recognize parked at the bottom of the gravel drive. I was shelling peas in the kitchen when I heard the doorbell, a sound I hadn't heard since the last Thanksgiving we spent here, back when my son still called me Mom instead of Mother. I opened the door. There he stood, my son. The same shoulders broader now, the same nose, a little more pinched, his eyes familiar but rimmed with confusion, disbelief, and something colder entitlement. Why are you here? I asked, voice steady. I should be asking you that, he said, glancing past me into the house. This place was supposed to be empty, I offered. Abandoned, forgotten. He flinched. Why didn't you tell me? He asked, holding up the envelope with the lawyer's return address. I didn't owe you a letter, I said. You left me with a driver and a billing code. I assumed that meant we were done informing each other of things. He tried to come inside. I didn't move. "This is my house," he said. "Or at least, no," I interrupted. "It never was. You were a guest. You were my son. And I opened this door to you for decades. But you stopped knocking a long time ago." He looked around as if waiting for someone, maybe his wife, maybe a lawyer, maybe decency. But none came. "You gave it to the gardener?" he asked, voice bitter. "I gave it to someone who never tried to erase me," I said. He opened his mouth to protest, to beg I'll never know, but closed it again. And then for the first time, in a very long time, he looked small. "I didn't think you'd fight back," he said. "I know," I replied. "That's how you knew it would hurt." He stepped back from the threshold, and for a brief second, I saw not the man he'd become, but the boy I once carried through fevers and nightmares, the boy who brought me dandelions, the boy who cried when the family cat died. I don't know where that boy went, but the man in front of me, I couldn't carry him anymore. "You should go," I said, softly. He did. I closed the door, and then I went back to shelling peas. The lake shimmered that afternoon like it was proud of me, proud of my voice, of my refusal to tremble. The sunlight filtered through the trees, dappling the hardwood floors with patches of gold, and, for the first time in what felt like decades, I didn't feel like I owed anyone an apology for still being here. Luis didn't ask me about the visit. When he arrived that evening to prune the lemon tree by the back gate, he simply nodded at me and carried on his hands, deft, practiced. We shared a quiet dinner, 2 bowls of chicken stew, and a plate of sliced fruit. He spoke of his daughter's upcoming violin recital, and I told him how my tomatoes were finally starting to ripen. We didn't mention the envelope. We didn't speak his name. But in the silence, something unspoken passed between us, a kind of knowing, that moment when someone sees the weight you've been dragging and doesn't offer to carry it, just walks beside you without asking why it's there. That night, I found myself unable to sleep, not from fear or anxiety, but from the quiet hum of emotions I hadn't yet named. I lit a candle in the living room and sat by the window watching the reflections dance on the glass. Then I opened the small wooden box I kept tucked in the drawer, a box of things I swore I'd let go of, but never could. Inside were crumpled photographs, brittle with time, notes in my late husband's handwriting, a button from my son's first school uniform, a birthday card he made in first grade, one side covered in marker hearts, the other a stick figure labeled Mommy with a crown. I held it to my chest, not crying, just feeling. I realized then that I wasn't angry anymore. Not really. Disappointed, yes. Betrayed, maybe. But the rage had burned off like fog in sunlight, leaving behind only clarity. And in that clarity, I saw a truth I hadn't dared face. I had loved them, all of them, beyond reason. And they had seen that love as infinite, as something that would never run out, never need refilling. They were wrong. The next morning, I made a decision, not out of bitterness, not to provoke, simply to free myself. I called the lawyer and asked her to finalize the second document, the one that ensured Luis's family would have a life tenancy agreement with full rights to use and enjoy the house in perpetuity. Not just ownership, but protection. No contest clauses, I asked. Yes, she replied. Standard now given the situation. Add one, I said. Make it ironclad. She hesitated, then added, do you want to add a personal letter? Sometimes that helps. I thought of all the things I could write, the grief, the sacrifices, the birthday parties I never missed, The nights I held him while he had nightmares about monsters. The years I worked double shifts just so he wouldn't wear hand-me-down shoes. The afternoons I sat in bleachers cheering for a child who never once looked up to see if I was there. But I wrote none of that. Instead, I wrote one line. I did not leave you behind. You walked ahead without looking back. I signed it, folded it, sealed it in the envelope, and then I let it go. That evening, I stood at the edge of the lake. The wind stirred gently, and I watched the ripples move out from the shore like quiet applause. My feet pressed into the soft earth, grounding me. Behind me was the house. In front of me, a horizon I was no longer afraid of. I wasn't seeking revenge. I wasn't hoping they'd suffer. What I wanted, what I had, was peace, not the kind others gave you, the kind you earned when you finally stopped begging for love you already deserved. From the edge of the dock, I threw a single stone into the water. It made the tiniest splash, but the ripples reached all the way to the other side. It was a Tuesday when the silence broke. A letter this time. Not from a lawyer, not from an institution, but from him, my son, my only child. It came in a pale blue envelope, his handwriting still the same small angular, too neat for someone who had once left muddy handprints on the kitchen wall and blamed the dog. I stared at it for hours before opening it, made tea, swept the patio, folded laundry that didn't need folding. Luis passed by, once nodded gently and said nothing. He knew the air around me had changed. The letter was an object with gravity. When I finally opened it, the first line was not an apology. It was a defense. I never meant for things to feel this way, Mom. I read it once, then again, then again. He spoke of the pressures of his life, the hours, the children, the unrelenting weight of modern adulthood. He said he thought I'd be better off with people who could take care of me professionally. He used words like structure, reliability, and safety. He never used the word love, not once. There was a paragraph near the end where he mentioned the house. If you've made any decisions regarding the property, I'd appreciate a chance to review them. We're still navigating some debt issues, and the kids were hoping. I stopped reading there because I realized what I had been avoiding all this time. My son loved the idea of me, the version that cooked, cleaned, sacrificed, the background character in his story, the woman who gave and gave and gave. But I, the real me, had become inconvenient. I wasn't bitter, not in the way some people expect. I didn't want to scream or throw things or curse the heavens. No, I felt something more dangerous, indifference. It startled me at first, the way someone might be startled by no longer craving a cigarette after decades. The absence of something once powerful, now replaced by stillness. I put the letter away, didn't write back, not because I wanted to punish him, but because I finally understood I didn't need to explain my love or my boundaries. That weekend, Luis's daughter visited the house. She brought her violin, stood in the back garden by the roses, and played a song so sweet it made the sparrows fall quiet. I listened from the porch hands, wrapped around a warm mug, and something inside me ached in the most beautiful way. She was 15, eyes bright, laugh like wind chimes. When she finished, I clapped, and she bowed like she was on a stage. She's got a gift, I told Luis. He smiled, not with pride, but with gratitude, the kind that said, thank you for seeing her. And I realized, perhaps for the first time in years, I was being seen too. Not for what I had done, not for what I could give, but simply for being here, still alive, still listening, still loving. Later that night, I walked through each room of the house, touched the walls, the photo frames, the table with the nicked corner from when my son bumped into it with his tricycle. I didn't cry. I just walked slow and certain through the life I had built, through the echoes of meals and laughter and arguments and birthdays, through the echoes of a woman who had once been invisible in her own story. No more. In the guest room, I opened the closet and found an old dress I used to wear for church, navy blue. Soft cotton smelled faintly of lavender. I slipped it on. It still fit. Then I looked at myself in the mirror, not the sagging skin or the silver hair. I looked at my eyes. They were clear, and that's when I knew I had returned to myself. Not the mother, not the widow, not the old woman with the lake house, just me, and that I whispered to my reflection would be enough. The next morning, I made a quiet decision, not out of anger, not out of hurt, but out of clarity, the kind that comes when the fog has finally lifted and you can see the shoreline for the first time in years. I called my lawyer. Yes, I still had one, a gentle man with a soft voice who helped me settle Tom's affairs after he passed. He'd always spoken to me like I had a brain, a rare trait I've come to learn when you're a woman past a certain age. Charles, I said I'd like to update the deed. He paused. Do you mean your will? No, the deed. I'd like to transfer the house now. Silence. Then carefully. To whom? To Luis. Another pause. Longer this time. I could hear him reaching for words that wouldn't offend. You're sure? I've never been more sure of anything. He didn't argue. He simply said he'd draft the papers and have them couriered over within the week. I hung up and sat still for a while, listening to the faint lap of the lake against the dock. It was a sound that had always comforted me, not because it was loud, but because it was faithful. Like Luis. I didn't tell him right away. I waited until the papers arrived, thick and official smelling of ink and permanence. I placed them on the table and called him inside after he finished watering the hibiscus. He came in, wiping his hands on a towel. Everything all right, ma'am? I gestured to the chair across from mine. Sit, he did, slowly, as if sensing something sacred was about to be shared. I slid the folder across the table. This house, it's yours now. He stared at me confused. Then he opened the folder and read the words. His brow furrowed. His lips parted, but no sound came. I don't understand, he said finally. You don't have to. Just accept it. I can't. You can, I said gently, and you will. Not because you asked, not because I owe you, but because you're the only person who's ever treated this house and the woman inside it like something worth caring for. His eyes filled with something fierce and vulnerable. But it's yours. No, I whispered. It was ours. Yours in the way you fixed the porch steps without being asked. Yours in the way you saved the rose bush after the frost. Yours in the way your daughter plays her violin and fills this place with light. He stood, then knelt beside me, this proud man who had never taken a gift he hadn't earned. He placed one hand over mine, calloused and steady. I will protect it, he said. I will honor it. And I will never, ever let it be sold to someone who cannot see what it is. I believed him. That night, he brought tamales from his sister's kitchen, and we sat on the back porch, eating in silence as the sun dipped low and painted the water gold. I felt lighter, not triumphant, not free in the fairy tale sense, just right. In giving the house away, I had given myself something back, not property, Not power, but peace. And no letter from my son, no legal dispute, no whispered judgment from neighbors would ever take that from me. Later, I walked alone to the dock and sat with my feet dangling just above the water. The breeze lifted my hair, and I remembered all the summers spent out here. Tom's laugh, my son's small hands gripping a fishing pole, the gentle creak of the wood beneath our folding chairs. And then I let it all go, not because it didn't matter, but because I no longer needed to carry it. I closed my eyes, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was waiting for something to return. The next few days passed in quiet rearrangements, not of furniture, but of meaning. I didn't tell many people, not the neighbors, not the women at the library, where I still volunteered on Thursdays. There are some decisions that don't need to be explained. They just need to be lived. But word spreads in places like this. Small towns have a way of eavesdropping with their walls. I noticed it first in the grocery store. Mrs. Halpern, the one who always pretended she didn't see me, was suddenly all smiles in the frozen peas aisle. "Oh, I heard you're making changes," she said, her voice syrupy and slow. I smiled. "Yes, I am. Giving the house to your gardener," she added with a laugh that wasn't quite a laugh. "Is that true?" I didn't flinch. "It is." The smile on her face froze in place, like a mask someone forgot to take off. She cleared her throat and picked up a bag of mixed vegetables she didn't want. "Interesting choice," she muttered. "It was mine to make," I said simply. "And I made it." She didn't reply. That night, I found a note slipped into my mailbox. No name, just crooked handwriting on lined paper. "Your husband must be rolling in his grave." I didn't cry. I didn't get angry. I didn't even bring it into the house. I crumpled it, slowly, deliberately, and dropped it into the metal trash bin just outside the porch, the same bin Luis had scrubbed clean last summer when the raccoons got into it. He was mowing the lawn when I turned back. He looked up and smiled, sweat glistening at his temple. He had no idea what the note said. He didn't need to. The shame wasn't mine. What surprised me more was my son's silence. I had expected fury, or at least an email, but there was nothing. Weeks passed. Then came a voicemail, not from him, from Amanda, his wife. "Hi, this is Amanda. We heard about the house. I know we haven't talked in a while, but I was just wondering. Are you okay? If you want to talk, we can. Anyway, let us know." There was no number left, no sign-off, just a soft click. It didn't matter. She didn't call for me. She called for herself, for the story they would have to explain now. Because somewhere in her circles, maybe at a wine tasting, maybe at her Pilates class, someone had said something, and now she needed to manage the narrative. I didn't call back. I spent my time walking the lake, paths trimming my own roses, reading poetry on the porch swing, listening to Luisa's daughter rehearse Mozart from the room above the garage. I began keeping a journal again, something I hadn't done since Tom passed. There was one entry I wrote over and over: "I am not a burden." It became a kind of prayer, a truth I repeated until it settled into my bones, like warmth after a long chill. Luis started building a new garden bed behind the kitchen. Raised wood, rich soil, delicate trellises. When I asked what it was for, he simply said, "Something that grows in every season." I stood there a long time after he walked away. The sun hit the back of my neck, and for a moment I felt like a child again, barefoot in a field, chasing the wind, unafraid of what I'd find. Sometimes peace doesn't arrive all at once. It comes in pieces: a soft chair in the morning light, A freshly brewed cup of tea, the sound of laughter you didn't expect to hear again. I hadn't expected any of it, but I was learning to receive. One evening, just as the light was folding into that golden softness it gets in late summer, I found myself standing at the edge of the dock behind the house. The lake was calm, glassy, the kind of stillness that almost dares you to disturb it. I hadn't stood here in years, not since before Tom got sick. We used to come out here every Saturday evening. He'd bring a small speaker and play Nina Simone while I read. We'd sit with our feet dangling above the water, his hand always resting gently on my knee. We never said much, but we didn't need to. That was the thing about love. When it was real, it didn't have to speak loudly to be heard. I sat down, slowly easing my knees into position. The boards creaked beneath me like they remembered. A soft breeze kissed my cheek. I closed my eyes and let the memory come not with pain, but with a kind of warm ache, like the feeling of an old bruise you don't mind pressing anymore. I opened my eyes to see Luis approaching from the path, carrying a small cooler and 2 mismatched glasses. "I didn't mean to interrupt," he said, almost sheepish, "but I thought maybe you'd want some company." I nodded. He sat beside me, careful not to rock the dock too much. From the cooler, he pulled out 2 small glass bottles, some kind of elderflower tonic, lightly fizzed, and handed me one. For the lady of the lake, he joked with a mock bow. I laughed, really laughed, and it startled even me. We drank in silence for a while, the sun melting behind the trees, the water catching fire in its reflection. Then he spoke. "You know, my mother used to say, 'Don't keep your treasures buried in the ground. Let them walk beside you while there's still time.'" I looked at him. Was she talking about people? She was talking about everything he said softly, but mostly people. I thought about the house, about the documents I had signed, about the generations of wealth and inheritance, and whispered assumptions I had quietly torn apart with one decision. And I thought about the quiet, steady presence beside me, a man who had never once treated me like I was invisible, who saw me as whole even when I didn't. Luis, I said you should build something out here. A bench, maybe. Somewhere to sit and think. "I'll start tomorrow," he said, with a smile that crinkled his eyes. When the sky had gone navy and the stars began poking through, I stood and began walking back toward the house. He lingered, watching the moon's reflection ripple in the water. From the patio, I turned to look at him again. The same man who used to clean gutters in silence, now seated where my husband once sat, not replacing him, never that, but becoming a kind of echo, a reminder that dignity didn't need to be reclaimed from others. Sometimes it was handed back to you by someone who knew what it looked like all along. Inside the house, I found a letter slipped under the door. The handwriting was unmistakable, my son's. I sat at the table, unfolded the paper, and read it twice before setting it down. It wasn't angry. It wasn't warm either. It was confused, wounded perhaps. A few lines stood out. "I don't understand how you could do this. You always told us family came first. You gave away our legacy to a stranger." Legacy, that word again. As if love could be measured in deeds and titles. As if showing up for someone year after year, day after day, mattered less than the color of their skin or the size of their last name. I didn't write back. Not yet. Some truths can't be explained in a single letter. They have to be lived, breathed in, sat with, like silence on a dock at dusk. And if he ever comes to understand that I'll be here, until then, I'll keep walking barefoot through my garden. I'll drink tea with Luis on cool mornings. I'll watch his daughter grow into her music. I'll fill the walls with new laughter, new light, and I'll know in the deepest, oldest part of myself that I chose right. For once, not out of obligation, but out of knowing. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual, stirred not by dreams, but by the weight of something intangible, like something inside me had subtly shifted during the night. I lay there for a few minutes, letting the stillness settle over me, listening to the hum of the ceiling fan and the chirping of birds outside the open window. The letter from my son remained unopened on the table where I had left it. I hadn't touched it since reading it. I hadn't needed to. There were no questions in it, only disappointments shaped like accusations. He hadn't asked how I was, not once, not even in the margins. I sat up slowly and reached for the cardigan folded at the end of the bed. The hallway was cool beneath my bare feet. When I reached the kitchen, Luis was already there, leaning against the counter, sipping from a steaming mug. "Morning," he said gently. "Didn't mean to wake you. The kettle sings too loudly." "It's okay," I said, pouring myself some tea. "I like the sound of it now." He looked at me for a moment, then said, "You okay?" It was the kind of question people ask without expecting a real answer. But he waited quietly, patiently, as if he meant it. "I think I'm adjusting," I said, "to being unneeded." His brow furrowed. "You think that's what this is?" Being unneeded, I smiled a little sadly. My son thinks I betrayed him, gave away what was his, but he doesn't understand that nothing was ever truly his. Not the house, not the memories, not me. Luis didn't speak. He just reached across the counter and refilled my cup. That afternoon, I found myself walking through the house with a different kind of gaze, not the distracted mechanical way one does chores, but with a painter's eye. I saw how the sun hit the far wall in the living room just right at 2 p.m. I noticed how the floorboards creaked more in the hallway than the bedroom. I saw a thread coming loose in the corner of the old tapestry Tom and I bought in Prague. The house wasn't a possession. It was a witness. And now, with new hands tending it, it would bear new stories. Luis had begun sanding down the old bench planks I suggested the day before. His daughter Anna was humming to herself while sketching something in chalk on the back porch. I recognized it as the outline of the lake with swirls of wind and small stick figure people on the dock. "You've got an artist," I said, kneeling beside her. "She says the wind talks to her," he replied with a chuckle, rubbing the back of his neck. "She's right," I whispered. We sat together on the porch, watching the drawing take shape, the scent of fresh-cut wood blending with wild mint from the garden. In the late evening, I received another message, but this time not a letter, a voicemail. It was my granddaughter Lucy. Her voice was hesitant at first, but not cold. "Grandma," she began, "Dad's been pacing around, yelling about you giving the house to someone else. But honestly, I'm just glad you're still at the lake. I miss that place. I miss you." There was a pause, then a quieter voice. "Do you think I could come visit?" I rewound it twice, just to hear those words again. "Do you think I could come visit?" I hadn't realized how tightly my chest had been braced until I heard her say that. A small, brave invitation, not to a place, but to a person. That night, I sat down at the desk in the study and wrote a letter, not to my son, not yet, but to Lucy. I told her the truth, that the house was still full of her grandfather's presence, that the lake still held magic, that the dock still creaked when you stepped just right. I told her I wanted her to come, not because she was an heir, but because she still knew how to see me. The next day, I walked the length of the property again, but this time, I wasn't trying to hold on to anything. I was preparing. I asked Luis if he'd help me turn the guest room into something more fitting a music room, maybe with space for Anna's instruments and Lucy's visits. He nodded without hesitation. "I've never known someone so willing to begin again," he said quietly. "Maybe I just finally stopped waiting for permission," I answered. The wind picked up a little, then stirring the leaves overhead, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like the house wasn't echoing with absence. It was filling with something new, not replacements, not make-believe family, but real chosen presence, and I could breathe again. The next few days unfolded like brushstrokes on a blank canvas. I woke up each morning with no obligation to explain myself, no need to wait for a knock that never came. The house, though quieter in some ways, had begun to hum with life of a different kind, the kind that doesn't raise its voice, but fills the silence with something warmer. Luis brought in old chairs from his workshop ones that needed a little love. Anna sat on the porch in the afternoons, legs swinging off the edge, as she read books she found on my old shelves, books I'd once read to my son. It would have hurt more, I think, if I hadn't already buried the version of him that used to sit in my lap while I braided his hair. He was different now, hardened in ways I couldn't soften, but Lucy's voice lingered in my ear like a melody I hadn't heard in years. I took out old photos, not to mourn, but to remember. I found one of Tom and I standing on the dock, a little water-stained, but still vibrant. We were laughing, his arm around my waist, his other hand shielding his eyes from the sun. I set it on the fireplace mantel, and beside it a small vase with wildflowers Anna had picked. The place had never looked so alive. One afternoon, while I was folding laundry in the back room, I heard Luis's voice rise outside, not in anger, but urgency. I opened the door just in time to see a car pull up to the edge of the property. I knew that silhouette. Even after all these years, the way he leaned forward while driving, the stiffness of his posture, it was unmistakable. My son. He stepped out, slammed the door, and stood staring at the house. Not the lake, not the dock, not even me, just the house. I didn't move. I waited. He approached with that same purposeful stride he used to use in court, the one that made witnesses shrink back and jurors sit up straighter. But when he reached the porch, his eyes flickered, not with power, but uncertainty. "You didn't return my calls," he said. I nodded. "I didn't think anything I said would change your mind. You gave it away. You gave away Dad's house, the house I was going to." "No," I said quietly, not unkindly. "I didn't give it away. I passed it forward." He laughed once bitterly. "To a gardener, to someone who sees me," I replied. We stood there, the wind brushing past us like it couldn't bear to pause between us. "I grew up here," he said. "This place." "You left it?" I interrupted. "You left me. And when you came back, it wasn't to visit. It was to plan what would happen when I was gone." His mouth twitched, but he said nothing. "This house never belonged to you, not the way you think. You were raised here? Yes. But it was Tom and I who built it. Every stone, every dollar, every decision. We shared it with you. We sheltered you in it, but we didn't owe it to you." Silence fell between us like dusk. "I'm not angry," I added after a moment. "I just finally realized I don't have to explain myself to someone who never really asked me how I was. He looked past me into the hallway. I thought I'd at least get a piece of it. You have your own home, a family, a law firm. You don't need a lakeside ghost. He winced. I stepped aside, allowing the quiet to settle before I continued. I still love you, but I won't live in the shadow of what you believe I owe you. He took a step back, then another. Lucy wants to visit, I said softer now. She called me. His face shifted, something flickering, just under the surface, but it passed too quickly. He didn't answer, just turned and walked back to his car. The gravel crunched under his expensive shoes, then under the tires. I didn't watch him go. Instead, I turned around and closed the door, not as an act of anger, but of preservation. Later that evening, Louise sat with me on the porch again. Anna was already asleep upstairs, the moonlight silvering the floorboards. Rough day, he asked. It could have been, I said, but it wasn't. He nodded. Do you regret it? No, I said. I thought I might, but I don't. I looked out toward the lake, the surface calm, reflecting stars. For years, I thought love was a debt, that if you gave enough, they'd remember. If you sacrificed enough, they'd come back. But sometimes they don't, and you still have to live. Luis was silent for a while, then said, You know this place, it's not just beautiful. It's honest, it's quiet, but it listens. I smiled. That's what Tom wanted, a place that doesn't just house you, but hears you. And that night, for the first time in what felt like years, I slept without folding in on myself, because I had been heard. The morning after his visit, I found a letter slipped under the front door. My name on the front. His handwriting slanted, precise, familiar. I didn't open it right away. I made my tea, sat by the window, watched the water shimmer under the rising sun. I wasn't afraid of what it would say, but I wanted to read it when I wasn't bracing for pain. When I finally unfolded the paper, his words weren't what I expected. Mom, I didn't come yesterday to fight. I came because I didn't understand. I still don't. Maybe I never will. But something about standing on that porch, it reminded me of things I thought I'd outgrown. You, Dad, the quiet. I saw your face when I said nursing home, and I still see it. I'm sorry I said that. I'm sorry I thought that. I don't know how I became the kind of man who would say it, but I know now you don't belong anywhere you don't choose to be. I just wish you had chosen to stay close. Lucy wants to visit. I hope you let her. Take care of yourself. I'll try to do the same. Will I read it 3 times? Not because it changed anything. Not because it fixed the past, but because it didn't pretend to. That was the first honest thing he'd said to me in years. I folded it neatly, placed it between the pages of an old gardening book Tom used to read, a soft place to rest. Later, I found Anna helping Luis replant herbs along the path to the dock. Basil, rosemary, even lavender. She called them my perfumes. You have a green thumb, I told her. She grinned. I have a green everything, even my socks. Luis winked. She's not wrong. I offered to make lunch, and for the first time in a long while, I cooked, not because I had to feed someone, but because I wanted to share something. We ate. At the porch table, the 3 of us. Luis brought wine. Anna spilled a little, and laughed so hard it made the birds scatter from the trees. It felt like a family, unlike any I'd known before, but not lacking for it. That afternoon, as I was sweeping the kitchen, I paused by the old cabinet where I'd stored Lucy's childhood drawings. I opened the drawer, still there, faded crayon sketches of the lake of ducks of me with wild hair and giant earrings. I hadn't realized how much I missed being seen through a child's eyes, where you are never tired, never bitter, always magic. Louise found me there, crouched on the floor, holding a crumpled drawing of the lake. "You all right?" he asked. I nodded. "I think I'm just remembering who I used to be." "Looks like she was someone worth knowing," he said. "She still is," I whispered. That night, Lucy called. She didn't hesitate. "Hi, Grandma. Dad said you gave away the lake house, and I told him that means you finally did something for yourself. Can I visit?" My heart stuttered. "Yes," I said. "Yes, you can." She told me about her college dorm, how her roommate chews ice at night, how she misses fresh eggs and the sound of loons. "I want to paint the dock again," she said. I promised her there'd be space brushes and enough quiet to hear herself think. When I hung up, I sat in the dark for a while, letting it wash over me. Not grief, not joy. Something calmer, something earned. In the days that followed, I cleared out the old attic, gave away what I didn't need, made space. I found Tom's coat, still holding the shape of his shoulders. I buried my face in it for a moment, not to cry, just to remember. I kept it. Some things you release, some you fold gently and hold on to. Luis built a new bench by the water, said it was for talking to ghosts or just watching birds. I carved my name into it, just mine, no title, no Mrs., no mom, no widow, just my name. One morning I caught myself humming. Not a song I recognized, just a sound, rising from somewhere that used to be buried. Luis heard it, smiled. "You're humming." "I guess I am." He didn't ask why. I think he already knew, because I wasn't waiting anymore. Not for someone to come home, not for someone to see me. I was already home. I was already seen. When Lucy arrived, it was late afternoon. The sun was low enough to cast long shadows across the gravel path, and she stepped out of the car in sneakers too white for this place, a backpack slung over one shoulder, and a watercolor set cradled like something sacred. I stood on the porch, not waving, just watching her, letting the moment stretch. She looked up, eyes wide, with something between wonder and disbelief. "This place is still exactly the same," she said, running her fingers along the railing like it was a memory she could touch. "Not everything," I said. "Come in." She dropped her bag inside the door and hugged me. Not the quick, distracted hug of a teenager, but one that lingered. Her arms around me like they remembered every bedtime story, every hot cocoa, every scraped knee. I kissed better. "I missed you," she whispered. I didn't say it back right away. Not because I hadn't missed her, but because hearing it from her made something inside me loosen like a knot I hadn't realized I'd tied myself into. That evening, we sat on the dock together, her feet bare, mine tucked into worn slippers. She dipped her paintbrush into the lake water and smiled. "Dad said you were done with the house." "I'm done with being where I'm not wanted," I said, "but I'm not done with beauty, or quiet, or people who laugh over spilled wine." She chuckled. "He's confused, you know, not angry, just confused. I know. I think he misses the version of you that never said no." I looked out over the water. That version nearly killed me. Lucy nodded. She didn't argue. We painted for hours without speaking. Her strokes were bolder now, less careful, more certain. I noticed she used fewer blues and grays, more ochre and burnt sienna. There was heat in her canvas, and peace. Luis brought us tea. Anna brought cookies and sat cross-legged on the dock, telling stories about the time she met a goat that could sense liars. We laughed so hard I had to clutch my side. I like them, Lucy said that night, as I tucked a blanket around her on the guest bed. They like you too. She hesitated. Do you think Dad will come around? I think he already is. Slowly, like a thaw. She bit her lip. You know he cried once, after Grandpa died. I saw him and he told me to go inside. He said he didn't want to fall apart in front of a kid. I sat beside her. Sometimes men are taught that love is something they carry alone, quietly, like a burden. She looked at me. Did it feel that way with Grandpa? No. With him, it felt like a garden, always growing even when I didn't know what I'd planted. She nodded. I want that. You will have it. But promise me something. Anything. Don't stay where you're only seen when you're useful. You are not a tool. You are not a trophy. You are not a placeholder. Lucy's eyes glistened. Neither are you. That night, I slept better than I had in months, not because anything monumental had changed, but because, for the first time in a long while, I wasn't bracing for disappointment. The next morning, we made pancakes. Luis tried to flip one in the air and caught it with his face. Anna made syrup from brown sugar and cinnamon. Lucy danced barefoot in the kitchen, singing along to a song I didn't know, but liked anyway. Later, she painted the bench Luis had built. She added wildflowers around my name. Then, without asking, she wrote hers beside mine. 2 names, no titles, just presence. That afternoon, I watched her pack. She left the paintings with me, said they were meant to stay where they belonged. She hugged me again at the porch tighter this time. I'll call, she said. I know you will. I'll visit. I'll be here. She hesitated. He might still be angry. I'm not asking you to choose, just to know that your love isn't a weapon. It doesn't have to hurt to be real. She smiled. You're still teaching. I'm still learning. As she drove away, the dust from the tires rose in the amber light. I stood there long after the car disappeared. Inside, I placed her paintings on the mantel. One was of the house, but not how it looked, how it felt, warm, golden, alive. The other was of me, seated by the lake holding a mug, my hair loose, my face soft. She had painted me as I was, not as I had been. And that I realized was the greatest gift, to be seen, not for what I gave, but for what I became. The days that followed felt oddly full, not in the way that chaos fills a space, but in the way warmth fills a room when the sun finally spills through a window left unopened too long. I woke early each morning, not because I had to, but because I wanted to see the mist lift from the lake. I drank my tea, slowly sitting in the same chair I had occupied during the loneliest months of my life. Only now the silence didn't bite. It breathed. Word had gotten around. Neighbors I hadn't seen in years stopped by. Some brought jam. Others brought gossip. One man brought a story about how my late husband once rescued his dog during a thunderstorm and never told a soul. I laughed in a way I hadn't in a long time, head back, heart open. It felt like exhaling grief. And then one afternoon, the phone rang. It was David. He didn't say hello right away, just a long, familiar breath, like he was gathering courage. Lucy told me she visited, he finally said. Yes, I replied. She did. He hesitated. She said you looked, well, I am. Another pause. She left her backpack at the house. She asked me to pick it up if I was in the area. She didn't forget it, I said softly. She left it. Oh, silence. David, I said I don't want this to be a war. I never did. I know. I'm not trying to prove anything. I just needed a space where I wasn't reduced to your definition of what mom should be. I didn't mean to hurt you. You didn't mean to see me. That landed heavier than I expected. I heard his breath catch. I was scared, he said. After Dad died, I thought I had to manage everything, be strong, make sure nothing fell apart. So, you manage me. Yes, and I'm sorry. I thought if I kept things neat, I wouldn't have to feel the cracks. They were already there, sweetheart. I know that now. He went quiet again. I've been talking to a therapist, he said, almost shyly. She told me I might have some unresolved control issues. I smiled, though he couldn't see it. That's brave of you. She also said I might have learned that from how Dad handled things, from how he silenced conflict instead of facing it. He did that. Yes. Another breath. I think I got angry at you for becoming someone he never let you be. I closed my eyes. And I got angry at myself for letting him define me for so long. I don't expect you to forgive me. I already have, but that's not the same as forgetting. I know, a softer silence this time, a stillness that didn't press. I'd like to come visit, he said, not to fix anything, just to see where you've gone. You're welcome here, but not as my caretaker, not as my judge, just as my son. I think I can try that. That night, I stood on the porch with the lake humming quietly behind me. I didn't cry, not out of pride, but because the tears had been spent. In their place was something sturdier, like a stone that had been weathered smooth. Anna came out and handed me a glass of wine. He's coming, I said. She smiled. They always circle back. When love is true, it doesn't lose direction, just time. Luis joined us bringing a guitar. He played softly, letting the notes drift out over the water like they knew where to land. I looked up at the stars, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel small under them. I felt placed, not above, not below, just here, whole. The day David came was quiet, without ceremony. He didn't call ahead. He simply appeared at the edge of the gravel path, holding Lucy's backpack like a peace offering. The lake shimmered behind him. I watched him through the screen door, and for a moment I saw Boy, again unsure of where to place his feet, clutching too tightly to what he didn't understand. I opened the door, said nothing, and stepped aside. He took off his shoes before entering. That small gesture, so reflexive, so unnecessary, in the scheme of things undid something inside me. Respect lives in the smallest movements. Inside, I poured him tea. He looked around like he was seeing everything in color for the first time. The walls, the windows, the lake view, he had only ever seen them as background. Now they held weight. You decorated, he said quietly. No, I replied. I revealed. He nodded. It's beautiful. We sat for a while. He placed Lucy's backpack on the floor, but didn't mention it again. We talked about nothing at first. The weather, the garden. Then slowly, memory crept in. Do you remember that time we got stuck on the road to Tahoe? He asked. I do. You were 11. Your father forgot to check the radiator. You made peanut butter sandwiches in the back seat, like it was an adventure. I laughed. That's all I knew how to do. Pretend. He smiled, but there was pain in it. I used to think you were made of silence. Now I think you were just hiding in it. I was. For years. He looked down. I think I made you feel erased. You did. But only after I let myself become a blank page. We sat with that. He pulled something from his pocket. A photo creased soft at the corners. Us. Me, holding him on my hip in front of the old house. His face full of wonder. Mine full of fatigue. I keep this with me, he said. I don't know why. I guess I've always wondered who that woman was. I took the photo gently. I've wondered too. I buried her under obligations. Do you hate me? No, I just stopped waiting for you to see me. And now, I'm not waiting at all. He closed his eyes, nodding. There was no anger, only a quiet kind of grief. The morning of time misspent, words unsaid, roles misplayed. I want to help, he said suddenly. You can't fix what you didn't break, but I can stop breaking it. That's enough. We took a walk along the dock. He looked out at the lake. Did you really give the house to your gardener? He asked with a crooked smile. I gave it to someone who saw me. He turned to me, and in his eyes I saw something new, an unspoken acknowledgement of who I'd become. Not his caretaker, not his dependent, a woman, a person, a soul. Mom, he said slowly, I don't know if I have the right to ask this, but can we start again? No, I said, touching his arm gently, but we can start from here. And that was better. That evening, he helped Anna chop vegetables for dinner. He asked Luis about the solar panels. We ate by candlelight, laughed at nothing. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. After he left, I sat alone on the porch. The lake was still. A single heron moved through the shallows, its steps careful and deliberate. I thought about what it meant to belong, not to a place or a person, but to oneself. I had not been given peace. I had made it. One stone, one silence, one truth at a time. The next morning, the sun poured through the windows like an old friend. I woke up without the heaviness I'd carried for so long. My feet touched the floor, and for the first time in years, it felt like the ground was holding me, not pulling me down, just holding. Luis had already gone out to tend the garden. I could hear Anna humming in the kitchen, her voice light and unhurried. The scent of fresh bread drifted down the hallway. I moved slowly, not out of pain, but out of reverence. Every gesture, opening the closet, tying my robe, brushing my hair, felt like a kind of ceremony, not for someone else's eyes, just for mine. The mirror once avoided now reflected something I could recognize. Not youth, not smoothness, not anything they celebrate in magazines, but something truer. A face that had weathered storms and still remained. A face that no longer flinched when looking back at itself. I stepped outside with my tea and walked barefoot across the wood-planked deck. The lake was a mirror that morning, still and reflective. It held everything without resistance, sky cloud tree and me. I sat in my favorite chair, wrapped in a shawl, and listened to the quiet. It didn't feel empty anymore. It felt earned. My phone buzzed. A message from Lucy. Just one line, Grandma. When can I come back? I didn't answer right away. I read the message twice, then set the phone down beside me. There was no rush. Some things deserved time, like healing, like rebuilding, like childhood returned on gentler terms. I thought of how many years I'd spent waiting for love, for gratitude, for someone to understand what it cost to give up your name for someone else's dream. I thought about the woman I'd been dutiful, quiet, and slowly erased. And I thought about the woman I was becoming, deliberate, unseen, perhaps, but not invisible. Later, I wrote Lucy a letter. Not an email, a real letter, handwritten, folded, carefully sealed, with the old wax stamp I hadn't used since my wedding invitations. It began, Dear Lucy, you can come back any time, but not as a visitor. Come as yourself. I didn't know if her parents would let her. I didn't know if she'd still want to. But I had extended the invitation, not just to her, but to life itself. The gardener came by that afternoon to trim the overgrowth near the back fence. He waved as he passed the porch, eyes crinkling under his straw hat. I waved back. I hadn't just given him a house. I'd given myself a life. That night, I lit a single candle on the windowsill and watched its flame dance in the reflection of the glass. It flickered gently, never loud, but steady. It reminded me of something I'd written in my journal during the early days here when a silence still hurt. I am not a story of what was taken. I am a song of what remained, and I finally understood what I meant. Word count, 1059. Awaiting continue. You said continue. ChatGPT said, final closing moment, 300 words. Some endings are loud courtroom verdicts, slammed doors, voices raised over years of silence. Mine was none of those. Mine was quiet. A woman sitting by a lake, remembering who she was before anyone asked her to be less. I never saw my son again, not in person. He sent a Christmas card, once unsigned, but unmistakably the handwriting, curled in a way only guilt produces. I placed it in a drawer beside a copy of the deed to the house and a photograph of me, Luis, and Anna laughing by the vegetable garden. We looked foolishly happy, sunburned, toothy, alive. Some days I still hear echoes of the past, a voice raised behind a closed door, the sound of my name said without affection. But they pass like old aches before the rain. This life, this version of me, is not loud. It is not the sort they write songs about, but it is true. Every morning, I make tea feed. The birds speak to the plants and reread letters I never sent. Every evening, I place my shawl over my shoulders and thank the silence for staying. It has become an old friend, the kind that asks nothing but presence. Luis built a bench overlooking the far edge of the lake. That's where I go when my hands tremble or when my heart remembers too much. I sit, breathe, and listen. To wind, to memory, to peace. Eleanor Thompson, once defined by everyone but herself, finally exists on her own terms, and that I now understand is the greatest revenge of all. Thanks for listening. If you've ever felt the same, betrayed, discarded, or invisible, leave a comment. Someone will hear you. Don't forget to subscribe. Your voice matters.